The box didn't have a tracking number. It didn't have a barcode, a digital entry, or a corresponding file in the Library of Congress database. It sat on a shelf in Subbasement 4 of the National Archives Annex in College Park, Maryland, squeezed between tax records from the 1920s and decommissioned naval manifests. It was a simple, corrugated cardboard container, likely reboxed sometime in the 1950s, but the label on the side was typed on paper that had yellowed to the color of tobacco stain. It read only, "Field returns, 42nd NY Detachment, August 1863, do not circulate." When Junior Archivist Daniel Kovic opened it on a Tuesday afternoon in September 2024, the first thing that hit him wasn't the dust, it was the smell. It was a thick, cloying scent of sulfur, wet earth, and something sweet, like flowers left too long on a grave. The box contained 3 items: a rusted Union Army belt buckle, a shattered glass vial stained with a dried black substance, and a leather-bound journal, its pages fused together by humidity and time. The journal belonged to Captain Elias Thorne. The official history books say Captain Thorne and his unit of 60 men were reassigned to guard duty in Norfolk, Virginia, in late 1863. They say the unit eventually mustered out with standard honors. But the history books are wrong, because the journal inside that box tells a different story. It tells the story of a mission that never officially happened, into a place that maps of the era simply labeled as the Great Dismal. If you think you know the history of the Civil War, the battles, the strategies, the politics, you're only looking at the surface. Beneath the surface, buried in the mud of the borderlands, lies a history that is darker, stranger, and far more terrifying. If you're ready to hear the truth that the War Department tried to burn, make sure you're subscribed, because we are about to open the file on the Lost Regiment. Hit that notification bell, because once we step into the swamp, there is no turning back. August 1863. The American Civil War was grinding into its 3rd bloody year. The Union victory at Gettysburg in July had turned the tide, but the South was far from broken. In the borderlands between Virginia and North Carolina, a different kind of war was being fought. It was a war of shadows, of guerrilla raids, and of silence. The Union Army occupied key ports, but the interior, the dense, untamed wilderness, belonged to no one. Captain Elias Thorne was a man of science before he was a man of war. A surveyor from upstate New York, he looked at the world through the lens of geometry and logic. He believed that everything could be mapped, measured, and understood. He was 34 years old, with eyes that had seen too much death at Antietam and a mind that sought order in chaos. But nothing in his education, nothing in his experience, prepared him for the orders he received on the morning of August 10th. His journal entry from that day is written in a neat, steady hand, the ink black and precise. He writes, "General Wild called me to his tent before dawn. The air was thick enough to chew. He dismissed his aides, poured me a whiskey despite the hour, and laid a map on the table. It was a survey of the Great Dismal Swamp, that vast, waterlogged purgatory straddling the state line. He pointed to a sector deep in the interior, a blank space where the contour lines simply stopped. We have reports," the general said, "of a Confederate supply line running through the deep marsh. Deserters, irregulars, moving gold and weapons where our gunboats can't reach. I need you to go in, Captain, find the route, burn it, and if you find the men running it, silence them." Thorne accepted the mission. It seemed straightforward, a reconnaissance in force. He selected 60 men from the 42nd New York, hardened veterans who knew how to march and how to shoot. They packed rations for 10 days, extra ammunition and quinine for the malaria that plagued the lowlands. They thought they were hunting rebels. They thought the enemy was a man in a gray uniform holding a musket. They marched out of their base at Deep Creek on August 12th. The sun was a white hammer in the sky, the temperature hovering near 100 degrees. As they approached the edge of the swamp, the landscape began to change. The solid earth of Virginia gave way to spongy, uncertain ground. The towering pines were replaced by bald cypress trees, their knobby knees protruding from the black water like skeletal fingers. Sarah Pierce, in our previous story, wrote about the atmosphere of the South being heavy with tragedy. Captain Thorne wrote about the atmosphere of the Dismal Swamp being heavy with intent. His entry from August 13th, the first night inside the tree line, reads, "We have crossed the threshold. The transition was abrupt, almost violent. One moment we were marching through scrub pine with the sounds of civilization, a distant train whistle, a dog barking, faintly audible behind us. The next, we stepped beneath the canopy of the swamp and the world vanished. The light here is different. It is green, filtered through layers of moss and vine until it touches the ground as a sickly, bruised twilight. And the silence, it is not the silence of peace. It is the silence of a predator holding its breath. The men feel it. Private Miller, a good soldier but prone to superstition, asked me if we had walked into a cathedral. I asked him why. He said, 'Because it feels like we are being watched by God, Captain, but not the one we pray to.'" The geography of the Great Dismal Swamp is treacherous even today. In 1863, it was a labyrinth of blackwater canals, unstable peat bogs, and vegetation so dense it could swallow a man whole in seconds. Thorne's unit moved in a single file, trudging through waist-deep water that smelled of ancient decay. They were following a map provided by a runaway slave the week prior, a rough sketch indicating a dry ridge known as the Adder's Spine, where the Confederate supply runners were rumored to camp. For the first 2 days, the mission proceeded according to protocol. They marked their path with blazes on the trees. They maintained noise discipline, but small things began to go wrong. The compasses, standard issue U.S. Army brass, began to drift. Not a lot, just a few degrees, but enough to unsettle a surveyor like Thorne. August 14th, Thorne writes, "The iron in the earth must be peculiar here. My compass needle refuses to settle on north. It drifts lazily to the west, then swings east as if tracking something moving beneath the ground. Surgeon Hayes, our medical officer, laughs at my concern. He says the heat is affecting my eyes, but I checked the sergeant's compass and it does the same. We are navigating by the sun, but the canopy is so thick we only see the sun in fragments. We are walking straight, I am certain of it, yet I have this nagging sensation that the swamp is slowly turning us, bending our straight line into a curve." The physical toll on the men was immediate. The water wasn't just wet, it was caustic. Soldiers reported rashes on their legs, angry red welts that burned and itched furiously. Leeches the size of a man's thumb had to be burned off every hour, but it was the psychological toll that worried Thorne more. By the third day, the unit reached the area marked on the map as the Confederate campsite. They were expecting a skirmish. They were expecting sentries, campfires, the crack of rifle fire. Thorne deployed his men in a skirmish line, bayonets fixed, moving silently through the reeds. They swept the ridge, adrenaline pumping, ready to kill or be killed. But there was no one there. The campsite existed, yes. There were fire pits, cold but filled with ash. There were flattened areas of grass where tents had been pitched. There were crates stacked near the water's edge, but it was empty, not abandoned in a panic, but simply empty. Thorne ordered a search of the perimeter. What they found didn't make sense. August 15th, the journal continues, the handwriting becoming slightly more jagged. "We have secured the objective, but the objective is a ghost town. The supplies are here. Crates of hardtack, barrels of salt pork, even 3 cases of Enfield rifles fully greased and ready for war. Why would rebels abandon valuable weapons? There are no bodies, no blood, no signs of battle. It looks as if they simply stood up in the middle of a meal and walked into the water." But it is the trees that disturb me. Surrounding the clearing on the trunks of 6 massive cypress trees there are markings, not letters, not military codes. They are spirals carved deep into the wood, bleeding sap. They look frantic, crude. And at the center of each spiral someone has embedded a single object. A tooth, a button, a coin, offerings. Surgeon Hayes, a man of profound rationality who had studied in Boston and Edinburgh, examined the camp with Thorne. Hayes was a tall, skeletal man with wire-rimmed spectacles and a demeanor that rarely cracked. But standing in that silent clearing, Hayes looked unsettled. "It's the smell, Elias," Hayes said to Thorne, his voice low so the men wouldn't hear. "Do you smell it?" "The rot?" Thorne asked. "It's a swamp, doctor. Everything rots." "No," Hayes replied, picking up a tin cup from a log. It was still half full of coffee. A film of mold had formed over the liquid. "Rot takes time. Decay is a biological process. It has stages. Look at this pork." He pointed to a barrel that had been pried open. The meat inside wasn't just spoiled, it was liquefied, a black sludge that bubbled faintly. "This barrel was opened recently. The manifest on the side says it was shipped from Richmond 2 weeks ago. Meat shouldn't decompose like this." "Not this fast. It's as if the acceleration of entropy in this place is heightened." Thorne dismissed the doctor's concerns as academic curiosity, but he couldn't shake the feeling of being observed. He ordered the men to set up a defensive perimeter. They would camp here, on the adder's spine, and wait. If this was a supply line, the rebels would have to come back. Night fell on the swamp like a physical weight. The canopy blocked out the stars. The darkness was absolute, broken only by the faint, yellow glow of the unit's lanterns, and with the darkness came the sounds. During the day, the swamp had been unnaturally quiet. At night, it screamed. Not the screams of men, but the cacophony of nature turned up to an impossible volume. Frogs, crickets, night birds, they created a wall of noise so dense it made conversation difficult. But underneath that noise, there was something else. A rhythmic thrumming. Thump, 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 like a heartbeat buried deep in the mud. Private Miller was on sentry duty at the northern edge of the camp. Miller was young, only 19, a farm boy from Poughkeepsie who had lied about his age to enlist. Around 200 hours, Miller came running back to the command tent, his face pale, his rifle shaking in his hands. "Captain," Miller gasped, stumbling into the lantern light. "Captain, you need to see this." Thorne grabbed his revolver. "Rebels." "No, sir," Miller whispered, his eyes wide, pupils dilated. "Clothes." Thorne followed Miller back to the water's edge. The sergeant held a lantern high, pushing back the gloom. There, snagged on a cypress knee about 10 feet out in the black water, was a jacket. It was floating, bloated with air, drifting lazily against the current. Thorne waded out, the water rising to his chest, cold and slimy. He grabbed the fabric and pulled. It came free easily. He waded back to the bank and threw the sodden garment onto the mud. The sergeant brought the light closer. Thorne felt a chill that had nothing to do with the water temperature. It wasn't a Confederate jacket. It wasn't gray or butternut. It was blue. Dark indigo wool, Union issue. A frock coat of the 42nd New York. "Is it one of ours?" the sergeant asked, doing a quick head count with his eyes. "Is anyone missing?" "All men accounted for, sir," a corporal shouted from the line. Thorne turned the jacket over. It was heavy, sodden, and covered in the same greenish slime Surgeon Hayes had noted earlier. He checked the collar. There was no name tag, no regiment number stitched inside, but the pocket was buttoned shut. Thorne undid the brass button, his fingers clumsy with the cold. He reached inside. He expected to find nothing, or perhaps a soaked packet of tobacco. Instead, his fingers brushed against paper. He pulled it out. It was a small leather-bound notebook, similar to his own but smaller, the kind soldiers used to write letters home. The leather had protected the inner pages from the worst of the water. Thorne opened it. The pages were filled with writing, but not in English. It looked like gibberish, frantic scratches and loops. But the last page, the page the book fell open to, was written in clear, heavy block letters. The handwriting was erratic, the pen having torn through the paper in places, as if the author was writing in the grip of a violent seizure. There were only 4 words. Thorne held the lantern closer, the yellow light dancing over the terrified scrawl. He read the words aloud, his voice flat in the humid air. "The mud is hungry." And below that, in smaller, desperate script, "Don't let them sleep." Thorne looked up at his men. The wall of insect noise abruptly cut out. Silence slammed into the clearing like a closing door. In that sudden, ringing quiet, a sound emerged from the water. A soft, sucking sound. Slurp, slurp. The mud at the edge of the bank bubbled. "Captain," Surgeon Hayes said, his voice trembling for the first time. "Look at the date on the entry." Thorne looked back at the book. He hadn't noticed it at first. The entry with the terrifying message was dated August 14th, 1863. "Yesterday." "This jacket," Thorne whispered, the realization hitting him like a physical blow. "It isn't from a soldier who came before us. It's brand new." "But who does it belong to?" the sergeant asked. "We have all our men." Thorne looked at the jacket again. He looked at the stitching on the shoulder. He looked at the specific, non-regulation patch sewn into the elbow, a repair job done with red thread. Thorne knew that thread. He knew that patch. He had watched his own wife sew it by the fire in their home in Albany 3 months ago, just before he boarded the train south. He dropped the book. He looked down at his own chest. He was wearing his coat. He touched the fabric. It was dry. He looked at the coat in the mud. It was his coat. The exact same coat, the same tier, the same red thread. Thorne looked at the water, black and glossy as a mirror. And for a second, just a second, he thought he saw a face looking up from beneath the surface. His own face. But the eyes were gone, and the mouth was open in a silent scream filled with mud. The silence of the swamp stretched, pulled tight as a piano wire until... The silence of the swamp stretched, pulled tight as a piano wire, until a single ripple broke the surface of the black water. Captain Elias Thorne stood frozen, staring at the sodden jacket lying in the mud, a jacket that was impossibly, undeniably his own. The red thread on the elbow patch seemed to glow in the lantern light, mocking his sanity. Around him, the men of the 42nd New York shifted uneasily, their eyes darting from their commander to the dark tree line. They didn't understand what Thorne was seeing. To them, it was just a dead man's coat, a grim omen but not an impossibility. They didn't know the specific intimacy of that stitching. They didn't know that Thorne was looking at his own ghost. "Captain," Sergeant Miller's voice was tentative, cutting through the fog of Thorne's shock. "Sir, orders." Thorne blinked, forcing the world back into focus. He couldn't tell them. If he told them he was looking at his own coat, panic would spread like wildfire. A commander who loses his grip on reality loses his men. He swallowed the bile rising in his throat and kicked the wet jacket aside, burying the red stitching in the muck. "Bury it," he ordered, his voice sounding hollow to his own ears. "It's a Union coat, likely a straggler from the coastline skirmishes who got turned around. Bury it deep. Double the watch. No one sleeps without a buddy. Move." The men scrambled to obey, grateful for a concrete task, but Surgeon Hayes lingered. The doctor's eyes behind his wire-rimmed spectacles were sharp, calculating. He looked at the muddy coat, then at Thorne's dry one. He didn't say a word, but the look he gave Thorne was terrifyingly astute. Hayes knew, or at least he suspected. The night passed in a suffocating vigil. No one really slept. The sounds of the swamp had returned, but they were different now. The frogs and crickets sounded mechanical, repetitive, like a recording skipping on a loop. And beneath it all, that low, thrumming vibration continued, thump, 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 vibrating up through the soles of their boots, rattling the teeth in their skulls. When dawn finally broke, it brought no relief. The sun didn't rise. The gray merely lightened to a sickly, bruised yellow. The fog was thicker than before, a physical wall of white that clung to the skin and tasted of metal. "We move out," Thorne announced, his voice raspy. "We find the supply line, we burn it, we leave. We are not staying in this place another night." They packed up the camp with frantic efficiency. The men were jumpy, dropping canteens, snapping at each other. The camaraderie of the march-in was gone, replaced by a brittle tension. They formed up in a column, Thorne at the head with his compass. He checked it. The needle was spinning lazily, refusing to settle. He cursed and looked at the sun, trying to gauge east through the heavy canopy. "That way," he pointed, aiming for a gap in the cypress trees that looked like a path. They marched. The mud sucked at their boots, making every step a labor. The water level had risen overnight, turning solid ground into a treacherous slurry. For hours, they slogged through the green twilight, sweat soaking their wool uniforms. The air was hot, humid, and still, devoid of any breeze. It felt like walking inside a lung. Around midday, they reached a landmark. A massive, ancient oak tree split down the middle by lightning, its scorched halves leaning away from each other like lovers in a quarrel. Thorne marked it on his map. "Good," he muttered. "Making progress. We're heading south-southeast." They continued. Another 2 hours of grueling march. The men were silent now, conserving breath, heads down. Then Private O'Malley, walking point, stopped abruptly. "Captain," he called out, his voice trembling. "Captain, you better come up here." Thorne pushed through the water to the front of the line. "What is it, O'Malley? Did you find the trail?" O'Malley didn't answer, he just pointed. There, rising from the black water directly in front of them, was a massive, ancient oak tree split down the middle by lightning. Thorne felt the blood drain from his face. It was the same tree, the exact same tree. He looked at the markings he had made on his map. He looked at the compass, still spinning drunkenly in his hand. They had been marching in a straight line for 4 hours. He was certain of it. He was a surveyor. He knew how to hold a line, yet somehow, impossibly, they had walked in a perfect circle. "We passed this," Sergeant Miller said, his voice rising in pitch. "We passed this at noon. I saw it. I touched the bark." "Maybe it's a look-alike," another soldier offered, desperation in his voice. "Trees look alike in here." "No," Thorne said, walking up to the scorched trunk. He reached out and touched a patch of moss he had scraped away hours ago. The scrape was fresh. "It's the same tree." A murmur of fear rippled through the platoon. Men looked around wildly, realizing that the landscape they thought they were traversing was actually a cage. The trees seemed closer now, leaning in, their branches interlocking like the bars of a cell. "The map is wrong," Thorne lied, trying to project confidence he didn't feel. "The terrain is deceptive. We drifted left. It happens. We correct course. We go right this time, sharp right. Use the sun. Keep the sun on your left shoulder. Move." They moved again, but the energy was different. It wasn't a march anymore, it was a flight. The men were walking faster, stumbling, looking over their shoulders. Thorne kept his eyes on the sun, or the bright patch of haze that passed for the sun. "Sun on the left. Sun on the left." He repeated it like a mantra. By late afternoon, the terrain began to change. The cypress trees grew larger, their trunks immense and twisted, covered in hanging moss that looked like gray rags. The water turned from black to a deep, iridescent green, shimmering with an oily sheen. The air grew colder, a sudden, unnatural chill that bit through their damp uniforms. And then they saw it. Through the mist, looming out of the water like the spine of a prehistoric beast, was a ridge of high ground, but it wasn't natural. As they got closer, wading through chest-deep water, the shape resolved into structures. Not tents, not cabins. Ruins. They were stone structures, low and circular, built from river stones that had been stacked without mortar. They were covered in vines and moss, half sunk into the muck, but they were unmistakably man-made. And they were old, ancient. The stones were worn smooth, the architecture unlike anything Thorne had seen in America. It looked Neolithic. "What is this place?" Surgeon Hayes whispered, wadding up beside Thorne. There were no settlements recorded here, not on any map, not even the old colonial surveys. "Maybe native," Thorne suggested, though he knew it was wrong. The tribes of this region built with wood and thatch, not stone. This looked like something from the moors of Scotland or the deep jungles of somewhere far older. They climbed up onto the ridge, their boots squelching on solid ground for the first time in hours. The settlement, if that's what it was silent. There were 6 circular stone huts, their roofs long gone. In the center of the circle was a large, flat stone, a table or an altar, cracked down the middle. "Check the perimeter," Thorne ordered, but his voice lacked authority. The men were staring at the stones, their faces pale. "Sir," Private Miller called out from one of the huts. There's a fire." Thorne rushed over. Inside the stone circle of the nearest hut there was a fire pit, and in the pit a small fire was burning, not dying embers, a fresh, crackling fire. A pot of water hung over it, boiling. "They're here," Thorne hissed, drawing his revolver. "Someone is here right now. Fan out, find them." The men scattered, searching the small island of dry ground. They checked behind every stone, every tree, but there was no one. The island was empty, yet the fire burned and the water boiled. Thorne approached the pot. He smelled it. It wasn't stew. It was just water boiling rapidly. He looked around. "Whoever lit this must have heard us coming. They can't be far." "Or maybe," Surgeon Hayes said, kneeling by the fire, "they never left." "What do you mean?" Hayes pointed to the ground around the fire. It was mud, soft and receptive. "Look at the footprints, Elias." Thorne looked. There were footprints in the mud, boot prints, Union Army boot prints. "Those are ours," Thorne said, "from the men searching." "No," Hayes said, his voice tight. "Look closer. The mud has dried inside the treads. These prints are hours old, maybe days." Thorne stared. The prints were indeed crusted over, but they matched the standard-issue brogans of his unit perfectly. He stepped his own foot next to one. It was a match. "We haven't been here before," Thorne said, feeling a wave of dizziness. "We just arrived." "Did we?" Hayes asked, looking up, his eyes magnifying the fear behind them. "Or is time broken here too, like the compasses, like the map?" Before Thorne could answer, a scream shattered the air. It came from the edge of the water, near the southern side of the ridge. Thorne ran towards it, splashing through the mud. He found 3 of his men backing away from the water's edge, their rifles raised. Private Jenkins was on the ground, scrambling backward on his hands and knees, his face a mask of terror. "What is it?" Thorne shouted. "Report." "The water, sir," Jenkins screamed. "The water, it grabbed him." "Who?" "O'Malley. He was right next to me. He went to fill his canteen and something pulled him in." Thorne looked at the water. It was calm, rippleless. "There's no disturbance, Jenkins. If an alligator took him, there'd be thrashing." "It wasn't a gator," Jenkins yelled, hysterical now. "It was hands, green hands, hundreds of them. They came out of the mud and pulled him down without a sound. He didn't even cry out, he just vanished." Thorne stared at the black water. "O'Malley," he roared, "sound off." Silent, the swamp swallowed his voice. "Form a line," Thorne ordered. "Drag the bottom. If he's down there, we get him out." The men hesitated. They looked at the water with terrified eyes. "That is an order," Thorne barked, drawing his pistol. "Move." Reluctantly terrified, 5 men waded into the shallows, probing the murky depths with their rifle butts and long sticks. They swept back and forth, the water lapping at their waists. 5 minutes passed. 10. Nothing. O'Malley was gone. "He's gone, Elias," Hayes said gently, putting a hand on Thorne's shoulder. "Whatever took him, he's gone." Thorne called the men back. They were shivering, wet, and on the verge of breaking. They huddled near the stone huts, away from the water. The sun was setting now, the light fading rapidly into a heavy, oppressive gray. "We camp here," Thorne said, knowing it was a terrible idea but having no choice. They couldn't navigate the swamp in the dark. "Light fires, big ones, keep them burning. 3 men on watch at all times. If you see anything move, you shoot it. I don't care if it's a squirrel or General Lee himself. You shoot it." Night fell like a hammer blow. The fog rolled in, thicker than the night before, swirling around the stone huts like living smoke. The men huddled around the fires, their faces gaunt, eyes hollow. They ate their hardtack in silence, chewing mechanically. Thorne sat by the central fire, his journal open on his knee. He tried to write a report, but the words wouldn't come. What could he write? Walked in a circle. Found ancient ruins. Time is broken. The water eats people. It sounded like madness. "Captain," Surgeon Hayes sat down beside him. He held a bandage in his hand. I need to show you something." "Not now, Doctor." "Yes, now." Hayes' voice was steel. He unrolled the bandage. Inside was a piece of flesh, a strip of skin clearly cut from a man's arm. Thorne recoiled. "What in God's name is that?" "I took a biopsy from Corporal Smith. He scratched his arm on a briar yesterday. Just a scratch. Look at it." Thorne leaned in. The skin wasn't red or inflamed. It was green, a deep mossy green, and the texture was wrong. It didn't look like flesh, it looked like plant matter. Veins ran through it, but they looked like leaf veins, rigid and fibrous. "It's not infection," Hayes whispered. "It's transformation. The tissue isn't dying, Elias, it's changing, it's becoming indigenous. The swamp isn't just around us, it's getting inside us. We are breathing it, drinking it, and it is rewriting our biology." Thorne stared at the green flesh. He thought of the red thread on his coat. He thought of the note, "The mud is hungry." "Is it contagious?" Thorne asked. "I don't know," Hayes admitted. "But Smith says he can't feel his arm anymore. He says it feels heavy like wood. If we don't get out of here soon, Captain, I don't think we'll leave as men. We'll leave as landscape." A sudden sound cut them off. It wasn't a scream this time. It was laughter. High, giggling, childlike laughter echoing from the darkness beyond the firelight. Every head in the camp snapped up. Rifles were raised. "Who goes there?" Thorne shouted, standing up. The laughter came again, moving. It was circling the camp, fast, too fast for a human running in mud. It was on the left, then the right, then behind them. "Show yourself." Then a voice spoke. It was clear, melodious, and utterly terrifying because it sounded exactly like Private O'Malley. "Captain," the voice called from the fog. "Captain, come see, it's beautiful down here." "O'Malley," Thorne stepped toward the edge of the light. "O'Malley, come into the light, that's an order." "I can't, Captain," the voice giggled. "My legs are roots now, but you should see the lights, the pretty, pretty lights." "What lights?" "The ones in the water, look." Thorne looked, and then he saw them. In the black water surrounding their island, lights were turning on. Pale, green, phosphorescent lights. Dozens of them. Hundreds. They weren't reflections. They were coming from beneath the surface. And as Thorne watched, the lights began to rise. They weren't lanterns. They were faces. Glowing, translucent faces floating just under the surface of the water. Faces of men. Faces of soldiers. And one of them, drifting closer to the bank, was the face of Private O'Malley. But his eyes were gone, replaced by blooming white flowers, and his mouth was moving, forming the words that echoed in the air. "Join us, Captain. The mud is so warm." "Open fire," Thorne screamed. The night erupted in a volley of gunfire. Muzzle flashes lit up the fog like strobe lights. Bullets tore into the water, splashing and hissing. The men fired blindly, terrified, screaming curses. They fired until their rifles clicked empty, then reloaded and fired again. But the laughter didn't stop. It just got louder. And now other voices joined in. A chorus of the drowned, singing a discordant, humming tune that matched the thumping rhythm of the earth. Thump thump, thump thump. The ground beneath the stone huts began to shake. The ancient altar stone in the center of the camp cracked louder, a sound like a gunshot. "Stop firing," Thorne bellowed, realizing the bullets were doing nothing. "Cease fire, save your ammunition." The shooting raggedly stopped. The smoke drifted low over the water. The lights were gone, the voices were gone. The silence returned, heavier than before. "Did we get them?" a private whispered. "There was nothing to get," Hayes said, his voice flat. "They weren't there." "I saw them," the private insisted. "I saw O'Malley." "You saw what it wanted you to see," Hayes said. Thorne turned to his men. They were on the edge of breaking. If he didn't do something, they would scatter into the swamp and die. "Listen to me," Thorne shouted. "We are under attack not by rebels, by something else. We hold this ground, we wait for dawn, and at first light we march west. We don't stop, we don't sleep, we get out. West, Sergeant Miller asked. Which way is west, Captain? The compasses don't work. We follow the wind, Thorne improvised. The prevailing wind is from the west, we walk into it. It was a flimsy plan and they all knew it. There was no wind in the swamp. The air was dead. As the men settled back into their terrified vigil, Thorne went back to the central fire. He looked at the cracked altar stone. He noticed something he hadn't seen before. In the crack, deep in the stone, something was glistening. He reached in with his knife and pried it out. It was a button, a brass Union Army button. But it was corroded, green with verdigris, as if it had been in the stone for 100 years. Thorne turned it over in his hand. Stamped on the back was the manufacturer's mark and a date. 1863. The same year, the current year. How could a button from this year be embedded in a stone that looked like it had been cracked for centuries? Thorne looked at Hayes. Hayes looked back, his face grim. Time isn't just broken, Elias, Hayes whispered. It's looped. We've been here before, and I think we died here. Thorne gripped the button until it cut into his palm. Not this time, he vowed. Not this time. But as he spoke, the fog swirled again, and from the darkness of the trees, a figure stepped out. It wasn't a ghost, it wasn't a hallucination, it was solid, a woman. She stood at the edge of the firelight, dressed in rags that looked like woven reeds and Spanish moss. Her skin was the color of deep mahogany, and her hair was matted with mud and shells. She held a staff made of twisted driftwood, topped with the skull of a heron. She didn't look afraid of the guns pointed at her. She looked disappointed. She raised the staff and pointed it at Thorne. You brought the metal, she said, her voice raspy, sounding like dry leaves skittering on stone. You brought the fire, you woke him. Who are you? Thorne demanded, stepping forward, his pistol lowered but ready. I am the keeper, she said, and you are the meat. She slammed the staff into the mud. The ground erupted. Roots thick as a man's thigh burst from the earth around the camp. They weren't stationary. They whipped and thrashed like snakes. One wrapped around the leg of a private and dragged him screaming into the darkness. Another smashed through the stone wall of a hut. Run, Thorne screamed. To the high ground, back to the trees. The camp descended into chaos. The swamp had woken up, and it was hungry. Thump, 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 thump. The heartbeat was deafening now. The water rose, flooding the ridge. The men scrambled, firing uselessly at the animated roots. Thorne grabbed Hayes and pulled him toward the tree line. The woman, the keeper, stood amidst the chaos, unmoving, watching them with eyes that held no pity. As Thorne looked back, he saw the fire pit, the one with the boiling water, overturned. The water spilled out, but it wasn't water anymore. It was blood, thick, dark blood. And the chant began again, rising from the mud, from the trees, from the very air itself. The mud is hungry, the mud is hungry. Thorne plunged into the darkness, the screams of his men echoing behind him, knowing that the nightmare had only just begun. The door to the world they knew had slammed shut. They were in the belly of the beast now, and digestion had started. Thorne plunged into the darkness, the screams of his men echoing behind him, knowing that the nightmare had only just begun. The door to the world they knew had slammed shut. They were in the belly of the beast now, and digestion had started. He didn't run so much as thrash, fighting a landscape that had become suddenly, violently alive. The water, previously waist-deep, seemed to pulse and surge, dragging at his legs with a current that defied gravity, pulling him not downstream but down. Roots, thick as pythons and slick with algae, uncoiled from the mud, snapping at his ankles. He could hear Surgeon Hayes gasping for breath behind him. The splashing of the doctor's frantic movements mixed with the sickening crunch of wood splintering back at the ridge. Keep moving, Thorne roared, though the sound of his own voice was swallowed instantly by the roaring cacophony of the swamp. Don't look back, just move. They scrambled up a muddy bank. slipping on slime that felt too much like coagulated blood, and collapsed behind the massive, buttressed roots of a cypress tree that must have been 1,000 years old. Thorne spun around, raising his revolver, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. He expected to see the roots chasing them, slithering over the mud like worms. Instead, the clearing they had just fled was obscured by a wall of fog so dense it looked solid. A curtain of gray wool dropped from the sky. Behind that curtain, the sounds of violence, the gunshots, the screams, the wet tearing noises, were muffled, distant, as if they were happening miles away or in another room of a vast house. Thorne counted the shadows emerging from the mist. Hayes, Sergeant Miller, Corporal Smith clutching his green-infected arm, and 3 privates, young men whose names Thorne suddenly struggled to remember, their faces masks of mud and terror. 7 men. That was it. Out of the 20 who had been on the ridge, 7 had made it to the trees. "Where are the others?" Smith wheezed, sliding down the tree trunk, clutching his rifle with white knuckles. "Where's Jenkins? Where's the lieutenant?" "Gone," Hayes said, his voice stripped of all emotion, clinical shock setting in. "They didn't make the tree line." "We have to go back." Sergeant Miller started to rise, though his legs were shaking uncontrollably. "We can't leave them." "There is no back," Thorne said, grabbing the sergeant's shoulder and forcing him down. "Look." He pointed at the fog. It wasn't just obscuring the view, it was erasing it. The path they had just run down was gone. Where there should have been a muddy slope leading down to the water, there was now a wall of impenetrable briars, thorns the size of fingers interwoven so tightly a rat couldn't squeeze through. The geography hadn't just shifted, it had reconfigured itself in seconds. They were trapped in a pocket of high ground, surrounded by a wilderness that was actively hostile. "It's a maze," Hayes whispered, wiping slime from his spectacles. "It's a rat maze, and the walls move." Thorne checked his ammunition, 3 rounds in the cylinder. He checked his belt pouch. Wet, likely useless cartridges. He looked at the men, they were broken. Their eyes were wide, darting at every shadow, every rustle of the wind. They weren't soldiers anymore, they were prey. "That woman," Thorne said, focusing his fear into anger. "The one with the staff, she did this. She controlled it." "She's a witch," one of the privates stammered. "A conjure woman. My grandmother told me about them. They live in the deep places. They trade their souls for power." "She's not a witch," Hayes corrected, looking at the briar wall with a scientist's analytical gaze. "She's a catalyst. She didn't create the energy, she directed it. Did you see her eyes, Elias? They weren't human. The pupils were. Horizontal, like a goat, or an octopus." "We find her," Thorne commanded, standing up. The decision gave him a purpose, a vector. "She knows what this is. She knows the way out. We find her and we force her to talk." "Force her?" Hayes laughed, a dry, hysterical sound. "Elias, did you see what she did? She slammed a stick into the mud and the earth ate half our platoon. You don't force a hurricane to answer questions." "Then we beg," Thorne said grimly. "We bargain, whatever it takes." They moved deeper into the pocket of trees, moving slowly, testing every step. The ground here was spongy, vibrating with that same low, subsonic thrumming. Thump, 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 thump. It was louder now, as if they were walking across the chest of a sleeping giant. The air smelled of ozone and musk, a scent that triggered a primal warning in the hindbrain. After 20 minutes of terrified creeping, they found her. She wasn't hiding. She was sitting on a fallen log in a small clearing, illuminated by a patch of phosphorescent moss that glowed with a sickly green light. She had built a small fire, not of wood, but of dried peat that burned with a blue, smokeless flame. She was staring into the fire, rocking slightly back and forth, humming a melody that harmonized with the thumping of the earth. Thorne signaled the men to hold back. He holstered his revolver, held his hands up in a gesture of surrender, and stepped into the light. "We don't want to hurt you," he lied. The woman didn't look up. Her fingers were busy weaving something from long blades of sawgrass. A doll, a small, crude figure of a man. You speak of hurt, she said, her voice sounding like stones grinding together underwater. You who carry tubes of iron to punch holes in flesh. You who burn the woods to clear lines for your maps. You are the architects of hurt. We are soldiers, Thorne said, stepping closer. We have orders. Orders, she spat the word into the fire. Paper words from paper men who sit in stone houses. Your orders do not reach here. The root does not obey the paper. She finally looked up. In the green light of the moss, Hayes was right. Her pupils were rectangular slits, expanding and contracting not with light, but with rhythm. Her skin was etched with scars in patterns that matched the spirals they had seen on the trees. Who are you? Thorne asked. Are you a maroon? Did you escape the plantations? I was born in the mud, she said. My mother ran from the whip before I took breath. She gave me to the swamp. The swamp raised me. It fed me. It kept me safe from the dogs and the men with guns. I am the keeper of the root. I am the voice of the drowned king. The drowned king? Thorne asked. Is that the leader of the deserters, the man running the supply line? The woman laughed, a sound like dry branches snapping. You still look with small eyes. You see men, you see wars, you see north and south. There is no north here. There is no south. There is only down. The drowned king is not a man. He is the mud. He is the water. He is the hunger that was here before your Christ, before your tribes, before the first fire was lit by a shivering ape. She stood up, towering over Thorne despite her small stature. The shadows seemed to stretch from her feet, reaching out toward the soldiers. Why is he angry? Thorne asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Why is he attacking us? Because you woke him, she hissed, pointing a finger at Thorne's chest. For centuries he slept. He ate the quiet dead. The ones who wandered in and died of fever. The ones who sank. It was a slow meal, a peaceful digestion. But then you came. You and your war, the cannons shaking the earth, the blood soaking into the groundwater, the iron. He hates the iron. It tastes like poison. You brought the war into his bedroom, Captain, and now he is awake, and he is ravenous. Surgeon Hayes stepped forward, mesmerized. The green skin, he said, pointing to Corporal Smith. The transformation, is that him? Is that the king? It is the blessing, the keeper said. He does not waste. What he takes, he uses. He makes you better, stronger. He takes away the pain of being a man and gives you the silence of the tree. It's not a blessing, Corporal Smith screamed, stepping into the clearing, clutching his arm. The green patch had spread up to his neck. Veins of chlorophyll were poolsing under his jaw. It's eating me, make it stop. Tell her to make it stop. The keeper looked at Smith with something almost like pity. You fight the current, that is why it hurts. Let go, sink. No, Smith raised his rifle, leveling it at the woman. Fix me, or I swear to God I'll blow your head off. Don't, Thorne shouted, lunging for the gun. But he was too late. Smith pulled the trigger. The hammer clicked, a dull, wet sound, no spark, no bang. Smith pulled it again, click, click. The powder is wet, Thorne said. No, the keeper smiled, revealing teeth that were stained black. The iron refuses to speak here. She raised her hand, palm open. The rifle in Smith's hand suddenly became heavy. He gasped, dropping it. The wood of the stock began to twist. Green shoots burst from the metal barrel. In seconds, the rifle wasn't a weapon anymore. It was a sapling, rooting itself into the mud between Smith's feet. The men backed away, terrified. This wasn't just biology, it was the manipulation of reality. You cannot kill the swamp with guns, the keeper said softly. You are in a stomach, little soldiers. You do not shoot your way out of a stomach. You are digested, or what? Thorne demanded. Is there a way out? You said you are the keeper. You speak for him. Can you bargain for us? The woman tilted her head, listening to the thrumming sound. Thump, 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 thump. He is curious, she said. He remembers you. Me? Thorne asked. Not you, the man. You, the echo. He says you have walked this path many times. He says your bones are already in his collection. He says he likes the taste of your despair. Thorne felt a chill that went deeper than the marrow. "The time loops," he whispered. "The jacket, the button." "A circle has no end," she said. "You walk, you die, you feed, you rise, you walk again. It is his game. He plays with his food." "How do we break the circle?" Thorne grabbed her arm. Her skin felt like cold, wet bark. "Tell me." She looked at his hand on her arm, then up at his eyes. "To leave the circle, one must break the line. One must pay the toll, a life for a life, a soul for a passage." "A sacrifice?" Hayes asked. "A trade," she corrected. "He wants a voice, one who can speak to the world of men, one who can carry his warning. He will let one go, the rest belong to the mud." "That's not an option," Thorne said, releasing her. "We all go, or none of us go." "Then none of you go," she said simply, and then she looked past Thorne into the darkness of the trees. "Ah, the herald has arrived. He wants to show you what you will become." Thorne turned around. From the fog, a figure was walking toward them. It moved with a jerky, disjointed gait, like a marionette with tangled strings. It was wearing a tattered Union uniform. "Miller," the sergeant whispered. "Is that Private Miller?" It was the sentry, the one who had disappeared first, the one who had found the note. But it wasn't Miller anymore. As the figure stepped into the blue light of the peat fire, the soldiers gasped in collective horror. Private Miller's skin was gone, replaced by a translucent gray membrane that pulsed. Inside his chest, where his lungs should have been, Thorne could see movement. Eels, vines. It was impossible to tell. His eyes were missing, the sockets filled with thick, black sludge that leaked down his cheeks like tears of tar. But the worst part was his mouth. His jaw hung open, unhinged, distended far beyond human limits. And from that gaping maw, water was pouring out. A continuous stream of black swamp water vomiting onto the ground. And yet he spoke. The voice didn't come from the throat. It vibrated from the chest cavity, wet and gurgling. "Captain," the thing that was Miller groaned, "so hungry." "Miller," Thorne stepped back, his hand shaking on his revolver grip. "Stand down, soldier." "No soldier," Miller gurgled. He took a step closer. "Only vessel." Suddenly Miller convulsed. His back arched, bones snapping with the sound of dry kindling. He fell to his knees, and the stream of water from his mouth intensified, turning into a torrent. And then things began to crawl out of his mouth. Large black beetles, centipedes with too many legs. They scurried out of his throat, dropping into the mud and rushing toward the living men. "Burn it," Hayes screamed, losing his composure completely. "Fire, use the fire." Sergeant Miller grabbed a burning branch from the keeper's fire and thrust it at the thing that had been his brother in arms. The creature didn't flinch. The fire hissed as it touched the wet gray skin, but didn't catch. Private Miller's head snapped up. The black sludge in his eye sockets seemed to focus on Thorne. "He sees you, Elias," Miller's voice changed. It wasn't gurgling anymore. It was deep, resonant, ancient. It was the voice of the drowned king speaking through dead vocal cords. "He sees the red thread. He sees the loop. You are almost right." "What do you want?" Thorne screamed at the thing. "I want everything," the voice boomed. Miller's body suddenly bloated, swelling rapidly like a balloon filling with gas. "Get back," Thorne yelled, tackling Hayes and rolling behind the log. Private Miller exploded. It wasn't an explosion of fire, but of pressure. A shockwave of black water, mud, and shrapnel made of bone blasted outward. The force knocked the men flat. The slime coated everything. Thorne wiped the muck from his eyes, coughing. He looked up. Where Miller had been, there was now a hole in the ground, a sinkhole, and from that hole the roots were rising again. But these were different. These roots were tipped with thorns that glowed red. They whipped through the air, seeking heat. One of the privates, a boy named Henderson, was too slow getting up. A thorn root struck him in the chest. It didn't just pierce him, it burrowed. Henderson screamed as the root snaked under his skin, visible as a moving lump traveling up his neck toward his brain. "Cut it out," Henderson shrieked, clawing at his own throat. "Cut it out." Hayes lunged forward with a scalpel he had pulled from his kit, pinning Henderson to the ground. "Hold him," Hayes yelled. Thorne and the sergeant grabbed Henderson's thrashing limbs. Hayes sliced into the boy's neck, blood spraying. He reached in with his fingers, ignoring the gore, and grabbed the wriggling root. He pulled. It came out with a wet sucking sound, a 6-inch piece of pulsating vegetable matter that hissed and tried to bite Hayes's gloved hand. Hayes threw it into the fire, where it shriveled and screamed like a dying rat. Henderson lay panting, bleeding heavily but alive. "We can't fight this," Sergeant Miller sobbed. "We can't fight the ground." Thorne turned to the keeper. She hadn't moved. She hadn't flinched during the explosion. She was still weaving the grass doll. "The way out," Thorne said, pointing his revolver at her head. "Now, or I kill you. And I don't care if the gun fires or not, I will beat you to death with it." The keeper stopped weaving. She looked at the devastation, at the sinkhole, at the bleeding boy. "Violence," she sighed. "Always violence. You think death scares me. I have died 1,000 times in this mud, but very well, you are persistent." He finds that amusing. She stood up and pointed with her staff. Not west, not east, but toward the center of the swamp, where the darkness was thickest. "The Cypress Citadel," she said. "The heart. That is where the loop is tied. That is where the door stands." "The Citadel?" Thorne asked. "What is that?" "His throne," she said. "Go there, present yourself. If you are strong enough to pay the price, he may let you leave. If not, you will join the regiment of the root." "Will you guide us?" Thorne asked. "I will watch," she said. "I enjoy the play." She turned and began walking into the dark, her staff glowing faintly. "Move," Thorne ordered his men. "We follow her. Pick up Henderson. Do not let him touch the ground." They lifted the bleeding private and stumbled after the woman, moving deeper into the throat of the swamp. The air grew hotter. The smell of sulfur became unbearable. And in the distance, through the fog, Thorne saw shapes looming against the purple sky. Massive, impossible shapes. They looked like cathedrals, but they weren't made of stone. They were made of trees. Cypress trees fused together, twisted and woven into towers that scraped the clouds. Bridges of vine connected them. It was a city grown, not built, a city that shouldn't exist. "My God," Hayes whispered, staring up at the nightmare architecture. It's beautiful." "It's a tomb," Thorne said. As they approached the outskirts of the Cypress Citadel, the water around their feet began to glow with that same eerie light. And looking down, Thorne saw them. Thousands of them. Beneath the water, perfectly preserved in the peat, were the bodies. Soldiers, Union, Confederate, colonial militia, native warriors, Spanish conquistadors in rusted armor. Layers of history, all stacked on top of each other, all facing the citadel, all with their mouths open in silent worship. "The mud is hungry," Thorne whispered to himself, realizing the true scale of the horror. "And it has been eating for a very long time." The keeper stopped at the base of a massive archway formed by 2 interlocking trees. She turned to Thorne. "Enter," she said. "The king is awake, and he is waiting for his tribute." Thorne stepped onto the bridge of roots. The wood felt warm under his boots. It felt flesh-like. He looked back at his men. They were terrified, battered, bleeding, but they were looking to him. "Stay close," Thorne said. "Whatever happens inside, don't touch anything, don't eat anything, and for the love of God, don't listen to the voices." He stepped through the archway into the shadow of the citadel. The darkness swallowed him. The thumping sound stopped abruptly, replaced by a sound that was far worse. Breathing. Massive, wet, rattling breathing coming from everywhere at once. The swamp wasn't just watching them anymore. It was inhaling. And soon, Thorne knew it would exhale. And he wasn't sure any of them would survive the breath of the drowned king. The door behind them swung shut. Not a door of wood, but a wall of vines that slammed down like a portcullis. They were inside. and in the center of the darkness, two massive, yellow eyes opened. The yellow eyes hanging in the darkness blinked, a slow, vertical motion that sounded like sheets of wet canvas sliding against each other. Thorne stood paralyzed, his revolver raised but feeling utterly insignificant, like a child pointing a twig at a thunderstorm. The breathing sound, that wet, rattling inhalation, filled the massive hollow of the Cypress Citadel, vibrating in the fluid-filled sacs of his own ears. It wasn't just coming from the creature with the eyes. It was coming from the walls, the floor, the vaulted ceiling of woven branches high above. The entire structure was respiratory. They were standing inside a lung that was slowly, laboriously taking a breath. "Don't shoot," Surgeon Hayes whispered, his voice trembling with a mixture of terror and scientific awe. "Elias, look at the light. It's not a predator, it's a lure." Thorne forced his eyes to adjust as the yellow glow intensified, illuminating the cavernous space they had entered. It wasn't a single creature. The eyes were massive clusters of bioluminescent fungi, pulsating in rhythm with the airflow, growing out of the rib-like arches of the cypress wood. But the light revealed something far worse than a monster. It revealed the architecture of the room. The walls were lined with alcoves, hundreds of them, honeycomb-like depressions in the living wood. And inside each alcove, held in place by translucent tendrils of amber sap, were things that had once been men. They weren't dead, not in the way a soldier understands death. They were preserved, suspended in a state of horrific integration. Thorne saw Confederate grays. He saw the tatters of Union blue. He saw the rotted wool of colonial militia coats and the rusted breastplates of Spanish explorers. Their faces were serene, eyes closed, mouths slightly open as if singing a silent hymn. Roots, delicate, hair-like capillaries, grew into their ears and out of their nostrils, connecting them to the greater mass of the citadel. "The gallery," the keeper said, her voice echoing in the vast space. She walked past the soldiers, running her hand along the wall, caressing the face of a preserved Seminole warrior. "The king keeps what he loves. He does not let them rot. He drinks their memories. He tastes their history." "My God," Sergeant Miller choked out, backing away, his boots squelching on a floor that felt disturbingly like muscle tissue. "They're trophies. We're just meat for the larder." "No," Hayes stepped closer to one of the alcoves, peering at a man in a ragged 1812 infantry uniform. "Not meat. Neurons. Look at the connections, Elias. The roots aren't eating them, they're networking them. This whole place, it's a brain, a massive biological archive. These people are the memories." "I don't care what it is," Sergeant Miller screamed, the sound shattering the fragile quiet. He spun around, leveling his rifle not at the walls but at Thorne. "I'm not becoming a battery for a tree, Captain. I'm not doing it." "Sergeant," Thorne said slowly, lowering his own weapon but keeping his eyes locked on Miller's frantic face. "Put the weapon down. Panic is what kills us here." "You killed us," Miller shouted, spittle flying from his lips. "You let us in here. You and your damn maps. You listened to the witch. You walked us right into the mouth. We should have turned back at the jacket. We should have run." "There was nowhere to run, Sergeant," Thorne reasoned, stepping forward with his hands up. "The swamp closed the door. This is the only way out, through the center." "Liar," Miller cocked the hammer of his Enfield. "You're one of them now. I saw you looking at the coat. I saw the red thread. You're already dead, Thorne. You're just a ghost leading us to the grave so you can have company." The other surviving men, Corporal Smith with his green-infected arm, the bleeding Private Henderson, and two others, looked between Miller and Thorne, their loyalties fracturing under the pressure of impossible horror. "Miller, listen to me," Thorne said, his voice calm, authoritative, the voice of an officer trying to hold a line that had already broken. "If you shoot me, you die here. She," he pointed to the keeper, "is the only one who knows the ritual. I am the only one who can negotiate. You kill me, you starve in the dark." "I'd rather starve than turn into that," Miller gestured wildly at the wall of sleeping captives. "I'm leaving. I'm taking the men and we're burning our way out. Anyone who tries to stop me gets a bullet." "No one is leaving," the keeper said softly. She wasn't looking at the men, she was looking at the ceiling. "The digestion has begun." "Shut up, witch." Miller swung the rifle toward her. "Wait," Hayes yelled. "Listen." Above them, the breathing sound changed. The inhalation stopped. A wet, gurgling click echoed through the chamber, followed by the sound of rushing fluid. The amber sap holding the bodies in the alcoves began to liquefy. It dripped down the walls, smelling of pine and copper. And then the eyes of the sleepers opened. Hundreds of eyes all at once. They weren't human eyes anymore. They were entirely black, devoid of whites or irises, shining like polished obsidian. Sergeant Miller froze, the rifle shaking in his hands. What did you do?" "I did nothing," the keeper whispered, backing away into the shadows. "The antibody response is triggered. You are the infection, they are the cure." A Confederate soldier in the alcove nearest to Miller pushed himself out of the wall. The sound of tearing roots was sickening, re-eep snap. He fell to the floor, landing on hands and knees like a beast. He stood up slowly. He was missing his lower jaw, the bone replaced by a fused mass of hardwood, but he moved with a terrifying, fluid grace. He didn't have a weapon. His hands were the weapons, fingers elongated into sharpened wooden talons. "Open fire," Thorne screamed, abandoning diplomacy. "Defensive circle now." Miller spun back to the threat and fired. The heavy .58 caliber mini ball hit the Confederate square in the chest. It should have punched a hole through him. Instead, there was a dull thud, a puff of dust, and the soldier kept coming. The bullet had impacted wood, not flesh. "They're hollow," Hayes shouted, firing his revolver. "It's an exoskeleton. Shoot the joints, shoot the knees." The citadel erupted into chaos. The sleepers poured from the walls, Union, Confederate, Spanish, Indian. A united army of the dead, stripped of their allegiances and repurposed as antibodies of the swamp. They didn't scream. They didn't shout. They attacked in total silence, a tidal wave of gray and blue and rot. Private Henderson, the boy with the neck wound, went down first. A Spanish conquistador, his armor fused to his ribcage with vines, lunged from the shadows and drove a rusted sword through Henderson's back. Henderson gasped, falling forward, and before he hit the ground, the roots in the floor were already wrapping around his ankles, pulling him down, claiming him. "Back to the archway," Thorne commanded, firing wildly. He blew the arm off a colonial militiaman, revealing not bone but a bundle of white fibers like celery stalks. "Retreat to the choke point." But the archway was gone. The vines had sealed it completely. "There is no back," the keeper's voice floated from somewhere above the fray. "Only forward to the heart. You must reach the heart." "Where is it?" Thorne yelled, ducking under the swinging club of a dead Union sergeant. "Up," she called. "Climb the vein." Thorne looked up. In the center of the room, a massive, spiraling structure, a staircase grown from the central taproot, twisted upward into the gloom. It pulsed with a rhythmic green light. "Miller, Smith, to the stairs." Thorne grabbed Smith by his good arm and shoved him toward the center. Sergeant Miller was screaming, swinging his empty rifle like a club. He was surrounded. 3 of the mudmen, 2 Confederates, and a man in 18th century rags were on him. They didn't strike him down. They grabbed him. They held him. "Help me," Miller shrieked, his eyes locking with Thorne. "Captain, don't leave me." Thorne raised his revolver, aiming for the head of the Confederate holding Miller. He pulled the trigger. Click. Empty. "Elias," Hayes grabbed Thorne's collar, dragging him back. "We can't save him. Look at the floor." Thorne looked. The floor around Miller was softening, turning into quicksand. The mudmen weren't killing the sergeant, they were planting him. They forced him to his knees, pressing him into the bioactive muck. Miller struggled, kicking and screaming, but the floor swallowed his legs, then his waist. Roots shot up from the ground, piercing his uniform, stitching him into the earth. "I'm sorry," Thorne whispered, the guilt hitting him harder than any bullet. He turned and ran. Thorne, Hayes, Corporal Smith, and one other private, a man named Lewis, sprinted for the spiral staircase. Behind them, Miller's screams cut off abruptly as the floor claimed his lungs. The army of the dead didn't pursue them up the stairs. They gathered at the base, looking up with those black, obsidian eyes, a silent audience watching the final act. They climbed. The staircase was steep, the steps slick with that same copper-smelling sap. The air grew thinner, hotter, and the sound of the breathing became deafening. What is this place? Lewis wheezed, his lungs burning. It's impossible. Trees don't grow like this. It's not a tree. Hayes panted, his scientific mind trying to process the nightmare to keep from snapping. It's an organism, a super colony. The swamp isn't a collection of plants, Elias. It's a single entity, one DNA, one mind. We are walking up its spinal cord. They reached a landing, a suspended platform of woven vines high above the gallery. Here, the walls were different. They weren't holding bodies. They were holding things. Thorne stopped, his breath catching in his throat. He walked to the edge of the platform. Arranged on pedestals of living wood were objects: a rusted Spanish helmet, a musket from the Revolutionary War, a pocket watch frozen at 3:00, a child's doll made of corn husks. And in the center, on a pedestal of black cypress, was a book. It wasn't a military log, it was a surveyor's journal. Thorne approached it, his hand trembling. He knew the binding, he knew the smell of the leather. He reached out and opened it. The pages were filled with handwriting, his handwriting. October 14th, 1863, we are lost, the compass spins. October 15th, 1863, Miller is dead, the lights in the water. October 16th, 1863, the mud is hungry. Thorne flipped to the end, the final entry. I have reached the heart. Hayes is gone, I am alone. The king offers a bargain, memory for freedom. I must give him the story, I must become the scribe. If you are reading this, Elias, you have failed again. You didn't break the loop. You just tightened the knot, start over, burn the map. Thorne staggered back, dropping the book. It's me, it's all me. What is it? Hayes picked up the book. He read the entry. He looked at Thorne, his face pale in the green light. This is dated 2 months from now. Elias, how many times have we done this? I don't know, Thorne whispered, clutching his head. I remember flashes. I remember dying in the mud. I remember drowning. I remember the red thread. The keeper, Corporal Smith hissed, pointing his good hand up the stairs. There. The keeper was standing at the top of the spiral, waiting for them. She held her staff high. Behind her was a massive, pulsing membrane, a valve leading to the inner chamber. The Library of the Lost, she said, gesturing to the objects around them. He keeps the tokens of every failure. You have added many volumes to his collection, Captain Thorne. Why? Thorne shouted at her. Why bring me back? Why let me loop? Because you are stubborn, she smiled, a sad, terrible expression. Most minds break after the first death. They become the hollow ones downstairs, but you refuse to break. You refuse to accept the irrational. Your denial tastes sweet to him. He wants to see if you can accept the truth this time, or if you will just add another book to the pile. What truth? That you do not matter, she said. That your war does not matter, that you are small. Come, the heart is open. Suddenly, the private Lewis screamed. He wasn't attacked, he just broke. The reality of the looping time, the impossibility of the situation, shattered his mind. I'm not doing it again, Lewis yelled. I'm not dying again. He ran, not toward the keeper, but toward the edge of the platform. Lewis, no, Thorne lunged. But Lewis didn't stop. He vaulted over the rail of vines and plummeted into the darkness of the gallery below. There was a long silence, then a wet crunch as he hit the floor, followed immediately by the sound of scuttling movement as the hollow men moved to claim the fresh biomass. And then there were 3, the keeper said, the soldier, the doctor, and the infected. She looked at Corporal Smith. Smith was looking at his green arm. The infection had reached his face now. His left eye was clouded with moss. "I can hear it," Smith whispered. "I can hear the king singing." "What does he say, Corporal?" Hayes asked gently. He says it's warm in the middle," Smith smiled, drool leaking from his lip. "He says I can sleep now." Smith walked past Thorne, ignoring his captain completely. He walked up the stairs toward the keeper. "Smith, wait," Thorne called out. "Let him go," the keeper said. "He has accepted the gift." Smith walked up to the membrane door. He didn't open it. He simply pressed his body against it. The membrane rippled, then absorbed him. He sank into the wall like a stone sinking into pond scum. For a moment his face pressed outward from the tissue, eyes wide and ecstatic, and then he was gone, absorbed, digested, integrated. "He is part of the heart now," the keeper said. "He is happy." She turned to Thorne and Hayes. "Now you, the final selection, one to speak, one to feed, come." She stepped through the membrane. Thorne looked at Hayes. The doctor was wiping his glasses, his hands surprisingly steady. "Well, Elias," Hayes said, placing the glasses back on his nose. "We wanted to find the supply line. I suppose we found the source." "We can still fight," Thorne said, gripping his empty revolver as a bludgeon. "Fight what?" Hayes gestured to the living walls. "Biology, evolution. No, we go in, we witness, and we do what we must." "I won't let you die, Doctor." "I think," Hayes said, looking at the surveyor's journal lying on the floor, "that you already have. Dozens of times. Maybe this time we get it right." They climbed the final steps. The heat was intense now, moist and suffocating. The thumping sound was a physical impact against their chests. Thump, 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 thump. Thorne reached the membrane. It felt like warm, wet velvet. He pushed. It gave way. He stepped through into the inner sanctum. It was a spherical chamber, vast and domed. The walls were translucent, glowing with a blinding amber light. And in the center, suspended by massive arteries of pools green vine, hung the heart of the swamp. It wasn't an organ, it was a face. A massive wooden face, 50 feet tall, carved or grown from ancient cypress. It was sleeping, eyes closed. But the roots growing from its head spread out into the walls, connecting to everything. The gallery, the mudmen, the trees outside, the very water of the Dismal Swamp. And standing at the base of the face, waiting for them, was the keeper. "Behold," she whispered, "the drowned king, the sleeper in the deep, he waits for the toll." She pointed to a small pool of black water directly beneath the face's mouth. "The water of remembrance," she said. "To leave, one must drink. To drink is to remember everything, every loop, every death, every scream. The mind that can hold the memory is the mind that earns freedom. The mind that breaks feeds the king." "And who decides who drinks?" Thorne asked. "You do," she said. She produced a knife, a jagged blade made of obsidian. She held it out to Thorne. "One drinks, one bleeds. The blood sweetens the water. The water frees the survivor. Choose, Captain, your duty or your friend." Thorne looked at the knife. He looked at Hayes. He looked at the massive, sleeping face of the god thing that had eaten his regiment. The breathing stopped. The room went silent. The king was waiting. Thorne took the knife. It was heavy, warm, and hummed with a dark power. He looked at Hayes, tears mixing with the sweat and grime on his face. "I can't do it," Thorne whispered. "You have to," Hayes said softly, stepping forward. He took off his coat. He rolled up his sleeve. He looked at the pool of black water. "Because I'm not strong enough to remember, Elias. I'm a man of science. Logic, if I drink that water, if I remember dying 100 times, my mind will shatter, and I will become just another hollow thing in the wall." Hayes looked Thorne in the eye. "But you are a soldier. You endure. You carry the weight. That is your curse, Captain. You survive." Hayes knelt by the pool. He looked up at the massive wooden face. "Do it, Elias," Hayes commanded. "Break the loop." Thorne raised the knife. The amber light flared. The king's eyes, those massive wooden eyelids, began to twitch. Thorne screamed, a sound of pure, unadulterated agony, and brought the blade down. Blade struck. It wasn't a clean sound. It was the wet, devastating noise of obsidian parting flesh, a sound that would echo in Captain Elias Thorne's mind for the rest of his unnatural life. Surgeon Hayes didn't scream. He gasped, a sharp intake of breath that carried the finality of a closing book, and slumped forward. His blood, dark and rich, spilled into the black pool beneath the wooden face of the drowned king. It didn't disperse. It swirled, turning the water into a shimmering crimson mirror. Thorne dropped the knife, his hands shaking so violently he could barely stand. He fell to his knees beside his friend, gripping Hayes's shoulder, desperately waiting for a condemnation, a curse, anything. But Hayes just looked at him, his eyes already glazing over behind the wire-rimmed spectacles, his lips moving one last time to form a silent word. Remember. The toll is paid, the keeper whispered. Her voice wasn't mocking anymore. It was solemn. She dipped a gourd cup into the pool, collecting the mixture of swamp water and fresh blood. She held it out to Thorne. Drink, Captain. Drink the history of the mud. Thorne looked at the cup. He wanted to knock it from her hand. He wanted to burn the citadel to the ground. But the breathing of the room had stopped. The massive wooden eyelids of the king were trembling, opening just a crack, revealing a sliver of ancient cosmic indifference. Thorne knew that if he refused, Hayes's death would be meaningless. The loop would reset. He would wake up on the march again, check his compass, and watch his men die all over again. He took the cup. It was cold, freezing his fingers. He raised it to his lips. For the regiment, he whispered. He drank. It tasted like iron, like rotted leaves, like salt tears. And then the world exploded. It wasn't pain, it was data. A tidal wave of sensory information crashed into Thorne's consciousness, obliterating his ego, his name, his very concept of self. He wasn't Elias Thorne anymore. He was them. He was a Powhatan hunter drowning in 1609, lungs filling with silt. He was a runaway slave in 1820, heart bursting from exhaustion as the dogs bayed in the distance, finding sanctuary in the roots only to be claimed by something older than the masters. He was a Spanish explorer in 1540, weighed down by armor, sinking into the muck while screaming prayers to a silent God. He was Private Miller, feeling the roots enter his chest. He was Corporal Smith, feeling the peace of the green infection. He saw the loops. He saw himself arriving at the ridge a dozen times, 100 times. He saw himself dying by the spear, by the fever, by the water. He saw the piles of journals in the gallery, a library of his own failures. He understood the truth of the Dismal Swamp. It wasn't evil. It was hungry. It was a biological archive, a storage device for suffering. It ate trauma and preserved it in amber and wood. It was the only place on earth where nothing was ever truly lost, only digested. And amidst the cacophony of voices, he heard the king speak, not in words but in a vibration that rattled his soul. You are the vessel, you are the carrier, Geo. The vision ended with a physical violence that felt like being birthed. Thorne was thrown backward, flown through the air, expelled from the citadel like a seed spat from a fruit. He fell through darkness, through the canopy, through the water. He hit the ground hard. Thorne gasped, sucking in air that smelled of pine needles and dry earth. Not sulfur, not rot, pine. He opened his eyes. He was lying on a grassy bank. Above him, the sky was a brilliant, piercing blue. The sun was shining, a real hot yellow sun, not the bruised twilight of the interior. He sat up screaming, Hayes Miller. Silence answered him, not the heavy, pregnant silence of the swamp, but the normal silence of the Virginia countryside. A bird chirped. A breeze rustled the tall grass. Thorne looked at his hands. They were caked in dried mud and black blood, but they were his hands. No roots, no green infection. He felt his chest. His heart was beating, a frantic human rhythm. He scrambled to his feet, spinning around. He was on the edge of the Dismal Swamp. The tree line was 50 yards away, a wall of dark green shadow, but he was outside. He was on the solid ground of the Nansemond River bank. He looked for his men. He looked for the unit. There was no one. The mud bank was smooth. No boot prints leading out, just one set of prints where he had landed. 60 men, Thorne whispered, falling to his knees again. 60 men went in. He reached into his pocket. His fingers brushed leather. He pulled it out. It was his journal, the one we found in the box. He opened it. The pages were damp, stained with muck. The last entry was the one he had seen in the vision, the one he hadn't written yet. October 16, 1863. I have reached the heart. But below that, in fresh ink that was still wet, a new line had appeared. The handwriting was jagged, frantic, but unmistakably his own. I remember. God help me, I remember it all. Thorne staggered to his feet. He began to walk north toward the Union lines at Deep Creek. It took him 2 days. When he stumbled into the picket line of the 9th New Jersey, they nearly shot him. He looked like a wild man, emaciated, covered in filth, his eyes wide and staring at things no one else could see. He was taken to the field hospital. He was debriefed by a major who asked him where his unit was. Deserted, Thorne lied. The word tasted like ash. They deserted, all of them. The swamp took them. And the supply line, the major asked. Did you find the rebel supply line? Thorne laughed then, a dry, cracking sound that made the major step back. There are no rebels in there, Thorne said. There is only the king. They discharged him for nervous exhaustion. The official report, the one filed with the War Department, stated that the 42nd New York Detachment was lost to enemy action and desertion in difficult terrain. Thorne signed it. Then he went to his tent, took his real field notes, the ones detailing the stone circles, the hollow men, the keeper, and he put them in a lockbox. He couldn't burn them, he tried. He held a match to the pages, but the flame wouldn't catch. The paper felt damp, cold to the touch. The swamp wouldn't let him destroy the memory. He was the vessel. He had to keep the story. So he hid it. He buried it in the bureaucracy of the archives, a needle in a haystack of government paper, hoping it would stay lost forever. But nothing stays lost, not in the swamp and not in the archives. Daniel Kovic, the archivist in 2024, closed the journal. His hands were trembling. The smell of sulfur in the climate-controlled room was overpowering now. He looked at the last loose page in the box, the one that had slipped out from the back cover of the diary. It wasn't parchment. It was a glossy, black-and-white photograph, grainy and high contrast. It was a satellite reconnaissance photo from the 1960s, Cold War surveillance. It showed the Great Dismal Swamp from high orbit. Daniel adjusted his glasses. He looked closely at the center of the swamp, the area where the map contours stopped. In the infrared spectrum, the heat signatures were visible. They weren't random. The heat signatures formed lines, perfect geometric lines. Rows of men, thousands of them, standing in formation, facing a central point. And at the very center, a massive heat-generating structure that spiraled upward like a tower. Daniel dropped the photo. He looked at the box. The label, "Do not circulate," suddenly felt less like an instruction and more like a warning. He reached for his phone to take a picture, to document it, to tell someone. But as his finger hovered over the camera button, his office lights flickered. A sound filled the room, a low, rhythmic thrumming coming from the ventilation ducts. Thump, thump, some thump. And on the desk, the rusted belt buckle, the one from the box, began to vibrate. Daniel backed away. The smell of the swamp filled his lungs. He realized with a dawning horror that by reading the journal, by consuming the story, he had done exactly what the keeper had said. He had drunk from the pool. He was the new vessel. The story wasn't just history, it was a virus, and now it was out. The Great Dismal Swamp is still there today. It is a protected wildlife refuge. People go there to birdwatch, to kayak, to hike the boardwalks. They see the cypress trees and the black water and they think it is beautiful. They don't see the hollow men standing just beyond the tree line. They don't hear the breathing. But sometimes hikers go missing. Sometimes compasses spin wildly for no reason. And sometimes, if you listen very closely on a quiet night, you can hear it. Not the wind, not the frogs. Thump thump. The heartbeat of a king who is waiting for his regiment to return. The 42nd New York never left. They are still there, standing in the gallery, waiting for the order to march. And Captain Thorne, he died in an asylum in 1898, screaming that the roots were in the walls. But he was wrong. The roots aren't in the walls. They are in the memory. And now they are in yours. That is the story of the lost regiment. A story the history books erased, but the earth remembered. It makes you wonder what else is buried out there in the wild places of America. What other armies are waiting in the dark? If this story sent a chill down your spine, if you felt the mud on your boots and the humidity in your lungs, then you need to join us. We dig up the history they tried to burn. We speak the names they tried to silence. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Do it now before the moss grows over your screen. Join the legacy of fear. We have so many more files to open, and I don't want to go into the dark alone. Question of the day. If you found an ancient, impossible structure in the middle of nowhere, like the Cypress Citadel, would you go inside to see what was at the heart of it? Or would you turn around and run, knowing you might never know the truth? Let me know in the comments below. I'll be reading them, assuming the roots don't get to me first. Until next time, stay out of the water.